It all started with a routine conversation on one of the popular online forums. People shared stories of how random websites or anonymous chats led them to strange events, but no one took it seriously. Posts about the deep web, rumors about forbidden video chat rooms, or strange invitations to private groups seemed like something out of a cheap thriller. But one story stood out from the stream of others. It sounded too real. A user named ShadowWatcher89 posted a message. "I came across a strange website on the darknet. All that was there was a black background and a sign in button. No description, no warnings. When I clicked, the video stream started. The camera showed a room with metal walls, and in the center was a table with objects that looked like medical instruments. A minute later, a man in a black mask entered the frame and just stared at the camera. He was saying something, but there was no sound. After a few seconds, he showed me a piece of paper on which my name and address were written. I turned everything off, but since then I feel like I'm being watched." The post quickly garnered thousands of comments, but ShadowWatcher89 was no longer online. Other users started sharing similar stories. Someone found themselves in photos taken obviously without their knowledge. Someone received threats after trying to contact the owners of strange sites. A week later, one of the active forum participants, under the nickname Data Miner, posted screenshots from a dark site where personal data was sold. Among them are photos, addresses, and even habits of the victims. One picture in particular caught my attention, a photograph of a dark hallway taken from a corner of the room. It looked like an amateur one, as if it had been taken by a hidden camera. The description stated, "Lot number 44. Full surveillance of the object." One of the missing turned out to be a tech student named Tom. He was interested in network security and was trying to figure out how such sites work. At some point, he decided to test anonymous messengers on the darknet. A few days after his last message that he had found something interesting, his friends noticed oddities. Messages from him became unnatural, with short answers like, "I can't talk," and then stopped altogether. Tom's friend, David, was trying to figure out what had happened. One day, he received a message from Tom's account. "Come to me, there is news." When David arrived, he saw that the apartment door was ajar. Tom was sitting at the computer, as if waiting for a guest. But as David got closer, he noticed that his friend wasn't moving. The computer screen was on, and a chat video was flashing on it, where someone was typing. Tom was too curious. On the table was a printout with a photo of David himself. David hurriedly grabbed his phone to call the police, but stopped when a new message appeared on the computer screen. "If you summon them, you'll be next." David's hand trembled. He turned around, as if expecting to see someone in the room, but everything was quiet. Tom sat motionless, as if frozen, his eyes were wide open. It looked terrifying. David stepped closer and touched his friend on the shoulder, but he fell to the floor like a broken doll. Glancing at the monitor, he saw that the computer's camera was on. On the other side of the chat, someone was following him. David turned off the computer, quickly left the apartment, closing the door with the key he found at the entrance. He needed to decide what to do next. He understood that this was not a simple story about hackers. Everything was too purposeful, too real. Over the next few days, David began to notice oddities. His phone was receiving messages from unknown numbers. "You were seen at his apartment. We know what you're looking for. You know what's behind it." He didn't answer. The phone rang at night, but when he picked it up, he only heard silence. On the third night after the events with Tom, David noticed something strange. Someone left an envelope sealed with a red seal on his mailbox. There were photos inside. He recognized himself in them. He was sitting in a cafe, walking down the street to his job, and sleeping at home. The last photo was particularly frightening. Someone had taken a picture of him at the moment when he was reading the previous pictures. 3 words were written on the back of the photo: "Don't go any further." David decided to contact his friend, Eric, an information security specialist. Eric lived in a small apartment crammed with equipment. When David told him about the incident, he just shook his head. "You either ran into scammers, or, for something more. Show me this envelope." Eric studied the photos under a magnifying glass. His face turned grim as he made out the faint symbols in the corner of one of the photos. "It's not just surveillance," he said. "These are the marks. Someone marked you as a target." David felt a chill creeping up his spine. "What does that mean?" "It means that you will be watched until you disappear yourself." Eric decided to help. He installed several security programs on David's laptop and explained how to mask his online activity. But that same night, something strange happened. Someone broke into Eric's apartment. David arrived this morning. The door was forced open, and the equipment was overturned. But the worst part was that Eric was nowhere to be found. There was only one entry left on his monitor. "We warned you. You're next." Taking Eric's laptop, David decided to look at the CCTV footage that his friend had set up in the apartment. What he saw made him restless. The video showed how, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, the door quietly opens and 2 men in black masks enter the room. They moved unnaturally fast, as if they knew every corner. One of them came up to the camera and looked directly into the lens. Then the recording stopped. David realized that running away would not solve the problem. He decided to find the source of these events. He began to study everything he knew about Tom and his recent actions. His search led to the mention of a forum hidden in the deep web. The forum was called Mirror, and its description was frighteningly concise. "We see everything." David entered using the instructions Eric had given him earlier. The forum turned out to be strange, thousands of messages, but almost all without a response. Headlines like, "They came for me" or "Someone knows where I live," were like a cry for help, but the posts went unheeded. The only active user under the nickname Witness left a message addressed to David. "You're close. Do you want to live? Leave now." David typed in the answer. "Who are you?" A few seconds later, the answer came. "The one who tried to leave. Now you're on the list." David wasn't going to stop. He continued his search and found a section of the forum that had been blocked. The page required a password. Suddenly, someone sent him a message with instructions. "You can come in. But only if you're willing to lose everything." David hesitated, feeling his fingers tremble over the keyboard. He realized that there was no turning back, but he still didn't realize what he was signing up for. After a few minutes of silence, he entered the suggested password, nullvoid33. The screen blinked, and a new page appeared in front of him. It was frighteningly minimalistic: black background, white text. It was written in large letters. "Welcome. Here you will find the truth. Or become a part of it." David scrolled down the page and saw a list of video files signed with code names like target_22, final footage_31, and incident_44. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the first video. A dimly lit room appeared on the screen. A girl was sitting in the frame, bound hand and foot. Her face was haggard, with obvious signs of beatings. The camera moved slowly, capturing every corner of the room, as if it were a demonstration for the audience. A few seconds later, a voiceover came on, flat and cold. "She knew better than to cross the line. Just like you." David abruptly closed the video, feeling his heart racing. It was too real. He opened the next file, which was called incident_44. The video began with the recording of a city surveillance camera. It showed a street at night, almost empty, with only a lone passerby crossing the road. The camera zoomed in on the image, showing the man's face. It was Eric. The scene unfolded without sound, which made it even more creepy. Two men in black masks appeared out of nowhere, as if they were waiting for him around the corner. They grabbed Eric and then dragged him into a dark van. The last frame showed the license plate, but the numbers were blurred, as if someone had disguised them on purpose. There was a caption at the bottom of the video. "Someone is always watching." David felt his stomach tighten. He closed his laptop and went to the window to get some air. But when he looked outside, he noticed something strange. There was a black car parked on the street directly in front of his house. She was motionless, with tinted windows. David felt a cold sweat rolling down his back. He moved away from the window, trying not to make too much noise, and closed all the curtains. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Have you seen them? Now they see you." He couldn't stand it. In a fit of panic, he grabbed his keys and laptop and ran out of the apartment. Climbing into a taxi, he told them to drive as far away from his neighborhood as possible. David got to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, where he rented a room and began to analyze what he had. He opened his laptop to check the forum again, but found that access was blocked. A message appeared instead of the usual screen. "You've gone too far. We're already close." At that moment, there was a knock on the door of his room. David froze. It was impossible, no one could know where he was. He cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. No one. The knock came again, but now it was coming from another part of the room. It didn't make sense, because the room was locked. He slowly turned around and saw an envelope neatly placed on his bed. This time there was only a piece of paper inside with a handprint stained with something red, and the phrase, "This is just the beginning." David hardly slept that night. He decided that he could no longer act alone, and the next day he contacted an investigative journalist whom he found online. The journalist, Michael, had a reputation for digging up the truth even where they tried to bury it the deepest. Michael listened to David's story and immediately agreed to help. He conducted his own research and found out that the Mirror forum was linked to a series of disappearances that the police had not even tried to investigate. All the victims had one thing in common: they had been digging too much into the closed communities of the network. But the most shocking thing was that Michael found an archived file containing a list of targets. David was on that list, too. Next to his name was written, "1 day left." Michael tried to contact his law enforcement contacts, but everything was going too slowly. Meanwhile, David noticed that his phone was starting to behave strangely again. He couldn't make a single call, and the apps started closing on their own. Late in the evening, when she and Michael were sitting in his office, the lights suddenly went out. The whole room was plunged into darkness. They heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. David took out his phone, turning on the flashlight, but this only increased the tension. The footsteps had stopped, but now there was a soft scratching sound at the very threshold, as if someone was moving something metal on wood. "Who's there?" Michael shouted. The answer was silence. In the tense silence, the grinding stopped. David and Michael looked at each other, not even daring to breathe. Suddenly, there was a thud on the door, so strong that it almost flew off its hinges. Both men jumped up. "Do you have something to protect yourself with?" David whispered. Michael nodded and quickly opened a desk drawer, pulling out a small pistol. It looked like it had been used for the last time about 10 years ago. "That's all I have." Second after second, they waited, but nothing happened outside the door. Michael steeled himself and slowly walked over to look through the peephole. He froze, as if he had turned into a statue. "What do you see?" David whispered. "There. Nothing." "What do you mean, nothing?" "Nobody. Empty." Michael opened the door, pointing his gun at the dark hallway. But the hallway was indeed empty. Only the dim light from the emergency lamp flickered somewhere at the end. He took a step forward, scanning the space. "I think they're gone," Michael said. And then suddenly, as if out of nowhere, he was grabbed. A black-gloved hand reached out from the shadows and wrapped around his throat. Michael screamed, firing blindly, but the attacker yanked him back with such force that he let go of the gun. "Michael!" David shouted and rushed forward, but the door slammed in his face. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge, as if it were locked from the inside. David was helplessly banging his fists on the wood while his friend was screaming at the other end of the hallway. These screams abruptly stopped, leaving only a dull sound, as if someone had dragged a heavy bag across the floor. David calmed down with difficulty and listened. A barely audible whisper reached him through the crack under the door. He realized that someone had left a note. In a hurry, he opened the door and saw a piece of paper pinned to the wall opposite. It read, "You're next. 24 hours. In a panic, he ran out of the building, leaving Michael's laptop. He had no plan, no place to go. His only thought was to escape as far as possible. He called a taxi and told them to go to the suburbs, to one of the old houses that belonged to his family. He had once spent a summer there as a child, and the house had long been empty. On the way, the phone vibrated again. The message was short. "Your choice of house is predictable. We are already waiting." David almost threw the phone away, but he knew it was the only way to stay informed. When he arrived at the house, everything looked as abandoned as he remembered. Broken windows, dust on every surface. The smell of dampness assaulted my nose. He closed the door behind him and immediately closed all the windows and doors. In a hurry, he found an old knife that was once used for cutting firewood. It was the only weapon he could find. For the next few hours, he sat in the kitchen, listening to every rustle. The house creaked, as old buildings usually do, but every movement made him shudder. At some point, he heard footsteps. They were coming from outside, slow and heavy. David held his breath. Someone walked around the house, then the footsteps stopped. "I'm armed," he shouted, trying to sound confident. The answer was silence. But the silence was worse than any sound. Towards midnight, David dozed off, but was awakened by a crash. He jumped up and grabbed a knife. The noise was coming from the basement. He didn't want to go down there, but he knew he had no choice. Holding onto the banister, he carefully descended the stairs. The faint light of the moon illuminated the basement through a small window. He saw that the door leading to the backyard was ajar. But the worst part was inside the basement. Michael's body was lying on the floor, and his laptop was next to it. Michael was clutching another note in his hands. David barely managed to pull her out of his weakened grip. It read, "You're late. There's only one way out now." There was a sharp creak behind him. He turned around and saw the basement door slowly closing. Someone was upstairs. He rushed to the stairs, but as soon as he reached them, he heard a voice. "Do you think you can escape?" It was a flat, cold voice, the same as in the video from the forum. David realized that his chances of getting out were zero. He was trapped. But something inside him, a final surge of desperation, made him grab Michael's laptop and try to find something that could explain this nightmare. David sat in the dark basement, feeling the panic gradually turn into a cold, paralyzing reality. A new message appeared on the screen of Michael's laptop, which he opened in the last hope of finding answers. "You can't run away. We see you. It's time to start the game." The screen blinked, and a program similar to a game with primitive graphics opened in front of him. An image of the house he was currently in appeared on the screen, but everything was drawn down to the smallest detail, including the broken windows and the knife he was holding in his hand. A timer appeared in the corner of the screen, counting down 60 minutes. There was one message under it. If you fail a level, your brother will die next. David froze. His brother, Thomas, lived in another city and knew nothing about what was happening. In desperation, David grabbed his phone to warn him, but the message had already arrived. Don't call him. We know what you're going to do. Start the game. The first task seemed strange and harmless, to find a key in the basement. David began frantically searching, lighting his way with the dim light of his laptop screen. A few minutes later, he found an old rusty key lying on the top shelf. As soon as he picked it up, the timer went to 0 and a new message appeared on the screen. Good. But you're too slow. You'll have to compensate. The screen showed a video of his brother. Thomas was sitting on the couch at home, watching TV. David froze. The video was shot in real time. A new timer has appeared in the left corner of the screen, 45 minutes. Underneath it was written, "Go to the house opposite. There's the next key." David didn't understand how this was possible. He saw no signs of being followed, but his every action was recorded. He ran out of the basement and headed for the house across the street. It was the same old, abandoned building as his temporary shelter. The door was unlocked. It was damp and dark inside, and it smelled of mold. The faint light of the flashlight on the phone illuminated the hallway. There was a table in the corner with a piece of paper written on it. Find the knife. You have 10 minutes. He began to search the rooms, feeling the seconds ticking away. He was greeted by strange details in every room, photos with cut-out faces, bloody rags, empty bottles with words like "run" and "they're here" scrawled on them. When there was less than a minute left, he finally found the knife lying in the bathroom. As soon as he picked it up, the phone screen flashed and a new message pierced his brain. You did well. Now the next target is your mother. His breathing quickened. He knew he couldn't stop. The next task was even more creepy. Bring the knife back, but now you have to leave it on the bed in your house. He had to go back, feeling like someone was watching him. Every step echoed in the empty house. When he finally left the knife on the bed, the laptop screen turned on again. Now the video showed his mother sitting at the kitchen table. Do you think we're joking? You will do whatever we say, or she will die. David could feel his mind gradually sinking into chaos. He tried to scream, to look for cameras, but he couldn't find anything. Then he received a new message. We want to know how far you are willing to go for their lives. A map of the nearest area appeared on the screen. The red dot pointed to a supermarket in the city center. The task was extremely simple and deadly. Take a can of soup from the shelf. Smash it on the floor. Leave without paying. His hands were shaking as he entered the supermarket. The store was almost empty, but he could feel the eyes on him. David went to the shelf, picked up the jar, and, closing his eyes, threw it on the floor. The glass shattered into pieces, and he ran to the exit, hearing the screams of the guard. When he returned home, the laptop was activated again. Good. Now get the knife out of the house. David began to realize that his tormentors weren't just playing. They tested him, squeezed the last of his humanity out of him. He ran outside and threw the knife into a ditch. But it wasn't enough. Now they were threatening his wife. The video showed her in the car, in the parking lot. If you stop, she'll never come home again. David realized that there was no turning back. He was forced to perform more and more insane tasks: hijack a bicycle, set fire to a trash can in a vacant lot, break into an abandoned police station. Each assignment was accompanied by new threats and videos of his loved ones who could die at any moment. The climax came when he was told to go to a park on the outskirts of the city. There he found a disguised box. Inside was a phone and an inscription. Last call. Choose, you or them. David dialed the number. The voice on the other end of the line was flat and cold. "You have completed all the tasks. The final decision is yours." He was given two options: either he ends his life, or his family disappears. Tears were streaming down his face when he realized that there was no way out. The laptop's camera was blinking, capturing every detail. He knew they were watching, and no matter what he chose, this horror would not end. The silence of the basement was interrupted by a sharp, desperate sound. A few hours later, the police found his body. There is only one line left on the laptop. "You were a good player. Who's next?"